One of the terrible consequences of the unrest in the Middle East is the incredible flow of refugees trying to find their way to Europe and elsewhere. We have all seen the heartbreaking video. And now the question is, what can the world community do to solve it? To discuss this development and what Europe needs to do to address the flow of refugees, we are joined again by Professor John Davenport from Fordham University, Bill Rosenberg, who's a professor from Drexel University, and Sebastian Aulich, who's an international lawyer and consultant. Also joining us via Skype from Istanbul, Turkey, is Anna Tuson, who is with Small Projects Istanbul. We welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Let's discuss the refugee situation. It is dire in many places, and I don't see the world as a community really addressing it. I see Europe addressing it in any which way they can, and not always doing the right thing, in my estimation. But why isn't the world involved in this?
Well, it's primarily affecting Jordan, Turkey, and now, with the flow of refugees into Europe, perhaps as many as 1 million this year. I mean, not only coming from Syria, but also Afghanistan and other conflict zones further afield. So, the onus is falling on Europe. And the German people, I think, have to be commended for their enormous generosity and hospitality. But I would argue that ultimately what we need to be doing to address the refugee crisis is solving the root of the problem in Syria itself. We should be joining with European partners, with Turkey, with Jordan, with Egypt, and other Middle Eastern nations to form a coalition to go into Syria, remove Assad, and manage a transition to a new government.
Well, let me ask the silly question or the obvious question. Why are they not emigrating to the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and so on?
Well, I have a better question for you. Why aren't they emigrating to Russia? Okay, there's no report of any Syrian trying to go to Russia, and if Russia is the big supporter of Syria, why isn't that happening?
Well, I ask you, why isn't that happening?
Okay, I've seen that discussed nowhere. Okay, what happens is these individuals who are really unfortunate or caught in a conflict zone, they have no way to really sustain their lives, and they're doing anything they can to get out of that region. But interestingly enough, a lot of other people, not just from Syria, are also joining that boatload of people going because they want to get out of their situation, which is not so great as well. So ultimately, it comes down to an issue about immigration, which is actually much broader than just Syria, but the whole policy of immigration, whether or not you're going to represent people or allow people to come to your country because they're refugees, whether you're going to have more open and receptive borders or not. And again, Germany has been phenomenal about it. Some of the other countries on the path to Germany haven't been so great. And they've been blocking the trains, they've been blocking their borders and so forth. But ultimately, we also have to face the fact that of these people that have left Jordan, how would one presume that they're ever going to go back to Jordan? I mean, we have all these young men, who would be the builders, and young women who are going to be the builders of the new sort of Syria. They're not there anymore. I think it's completely unrealistic to think they're going to go to Germany, they're going to get refugee status, and then they're going to want to go back to Syria.
Well, let's ask Mr. Aulich here. I mean, economics shows us when you have an influx of refugees, it eventually helps the economy of that particular nation. They take jobs that people don't want to do, and it actually grows the economy. Is that what Germany is thinking now?
I don't think so. It's more about humanitarian thinking that we have right now.
But they have said as well that these
Angela Merkel, she's going to go in front of the camera. She's going to use whatever argument she can use to persuade and build some kind of support for her policies. To answer your question, I believe the European Union is really complaining about human trafficking, which is happening from Turkey. Those immigrants are pretty much smuggled into the European Union. Why European Union? Because it's pretty much an open society. Now, can they really get adopted into the economy, European economy? At some point, probably. But how are you going to place them in the Czech Republic, in Poland, and other countries when the culture is so much different? They don't speak the language, they don't really have the skills.
But I mean, a lot of immigrants came to the United States, and it was the same situation. They didn't speak the language, they assimilated, they grew the economy, they became very successful.
No. I mean, first of all, English is so much easier than French, than, for example, Polish. So that's one thing. Second thing, you can see in the United States that not really all communities are assimilating the way they were. You can see Mexicans who are forming very hard to assimilate.
All right, let me stop you there. Let's go to Anna Tuson, who is live from Istanbul via Skype. Tell us about the Small Projects Istanbul. What is that about? The project that you're involved in.
Sure. It's a grassroots project, and our focus is actually education, because the people that we deal with, our beneficiaries, those Syrian refugees who have settled in Istanbul, are actually beyond that stage of just requiring basic needs. So, you know, they're outside of the camps. It's obviously an urban response. So, you know, the need that we've identified is for people to be able to rebuild their lives and to look to the future. You know, these are people that have been here for 2, 3, 4 years, and it's about actually, you know, doing something that's going to build up so we don't have this lost generation, which would, you know, make the effects of this war sort of carry over to at least one, if not more, generations.
Now, Anna, is it true that Turkey holds or has the biggest number of refugees, 2 million from this conflict?
Exactly. It's estimated at around 2 million. So, I mean, the majority of refugees, of Syrian refugees, are in 5 countries in this region. And yes, Turkey has around 2 million.
All right, coming back to the panel, we asked the question, I think we got an answer. Why aren't they emigrating to Russia?
Well, first of all, I would say that they are escaping to Jordan as well. Jordan is carrying an enormous load. It doesn't get much coverage, and the United States is providing a lot of material support for the immigrants from Syria going into Jordan. I think the reality is that they want to go to a free and open society. That's why they're not probably making all efforts to go.
Well, wouldn't Russia welcome them? They are a Syrian ally.
Well, I don't think there's necessarily I think the difference is that I think the goal for people in that region is to get to Western European countries. They're not focused on, I don't know that Russia is saying you cannot come, but I see no mass movement that way. I see no Putin going on television and encouraging
Wouldn't this be a good move
them.
for Putin?
Well, Putin has described basically anyone who's opposed to Assad as a terrorist.
Right.
I mean, he's basically, you know, the word terrorist has been made meaningless by Putin and his henchmen. So I don't think any person emigrating from Syria is going to look to Russia as a friendly, kind of welcoming place. In fact, I think Putin has, this is terrible for the Russian people. I mean, he's going to have drawn the wrath of, you know, Sunni-based ultra-fundamentalist movements against Russia for decades, because, I mean, it's going to look, and it to some extent is it a Russian attack on the interests of Sunni people in that region? I mean, look, in the long run, what's needed here is, just as the professor says, that we have to have a stable, democratic society in Syria. And now probably this is, at this point, going to have to be through some kind of partition. I mean, you're not going to unfortunately
call that a long shot at this point?
Well, no, I don't think it is. If Western powers
Assad
with Middle
would
Eastern
have to
allies,
leave or be removed.
not necessarily, because you could have Assad or some government that descends from Assad, you know, run by now a majority of the Shia people in Damascus and the western seaboard of Syria. That could be a small country, the remnant of Syria, and then you create what's now going to be a majority Sunni nation out of the rest of Syria and some of some of western Iraq.
Let me throw this out so we keep on the refugee issue. Is the United States doing enough with regard to this? Processing, making sure these refugees in some way, shape, or form find a place?
Well, the United States initially said they were going to take 10,000 refugees from Syria, which was kind of almost a laughable number when you looked at what Germany was doing. They've since revised their estimates significantly higher. But you have to recognize that there's also domestic politics in the United States. The United States has probably half of the country not wanting any immigrants in the United States. And I don't know that they're necessarily differentiating between immigrants and refugees, which is an important distinction. But still, I don't think most Americans notice the difference. So I think it's going to be much easier for the people from the Middle East to be able to get into Europe than they are to be able to get to the United States. Today, when we talk about coming to the United States, we're largely talking about coming on aircraft.
Right.
It has all types of documentation attached. It's not like you move through train stations and you walk miles and miles. You cannot walk to the United States.
All right, now Sebastian, let me ask you, you're international law specialist. Are some countries better or worse for them to end up in? Is Germany the best bet they have?
Well, I think that's their calculation. And second of all, they're being trafficked. But just to expand on your own point, which is important, there's also a huge opposition within Europe against the refugees.
Yes. Right.
Toward the refugees. It's not only the United States problem, but the director of the FBI said that at this point they don't have capacity to screen those 10,000 refugees for any terror ties.
Right.
So now imagine what happens in Europe with the majority of those refugees goes in those countries. We don't really have capacities to even do that kind of vetting. And it comes after the Charlie Hebdo massacre. It comes
all of that complicates it. Is exactly right. Anna Tuson in Istanbul, what are the refugees saying to you, if anything?
About where they want to go?
Well, not only where they want to go, but what they have experienced.
Well, I think that actually a lot of them want to stay in Turkey because it's, obviously it's closer in terms, not just geographically, but culturally in terms of religion. But obviously Turkey itself is a developing country in a lot of aspects. So there are, because in Europe there are things that are, look more advantageous, just in terms of career, education. So there's a kind of mix, demographic. I think that if Turkey would have more support, and not just in terms of financial contribution, but in terms of actual expertise to build a stronger infrastructure to actually manage the crisis, it could be, the needs could be met in a much better way. But I also do think that, obviously a lot of people want to go to more developed countries, where the education system is very strong, where the job market is much stronger than it is here. And I think that those countries need to be, keeping their doors open. Obviously, there's just a few countries which are taking that responsibility.
Let me just stop you there for just a moment, because I've been dying to answer this question. These people are taking a perilous journey overland, sometimes overseas.
It's awful.
If Germany really wants them, if the other countries really want them, why don't you land a plane there, load up the plane, and have continued flights out? It seems like an obvious question. One which the bride, my wife the other day, said, why didn't they just fly them out? Why don't they?
Why don't they create? Why haven't they created like the UN safe zone areas that we had in the Balkans? But they didn't work that well in the region.
Well,
but
Clinton proposed that. Yeah.
Yeah, but why don't they? If countries say to Syria, look, we'll take some of these, or a neighboring country, and just fly them out.
What the most Angela Merkel did, she visited Turkey, I believe, a week ago to talk with the government, and she offered to Turkey some kind of incentives. They offered them, I think, $3 billion to deal with the refugee crisis. Right. They probably offered them to open negotiations to access to the European Union, but it is really not enough, in my view.
Well, if we're not going to do anything to stop Assad, I think, the United States and other European countries.
Let's go to that plane question again.
Yeah.
Because I don't hear an answer to this. Why don't they just fly these folks out?
Well, I think you'd probably, if you're talking about 500,000 refugees. That's how many have flooded into Europe just this year alone.
Isn't it safer to take them by a plane?
I think you'd probably have to do it by train,
even
to be honest,
or
from
ferry,
Turkey,
or whatever the case may be. Why
not? But it's the domestic politics, right? They don't want to be seen to be moving that many people intentionally to make. The problem is that when you make it easier, you incentivize an even greater flow.
Right.
And so now you have, 1 million people on the move in half a year instead
and you also have people who may not even be from Syria that are among those individuals.
True. Right.
So what happens is people are throwing away their passports, they're huddling to be part of the crowd, and they're trying to move into Europe. And I guess the question is really, do the European countries want to look like they're doing something like Israel did a number of years ago with Ethiopian Jews, yes, and putting them on planes? But the order of magnitude for the Ethiopian Jewish airlift was minuscule in terms of what we're talking about here. You'd be flying planes nonstop, day and night.
Couldn't the countries get together of the European Union and say, you accept X, you accept Y, you accept Z, we'll send the planes out.
There's been no agreement. They tried to get an agreement about how many people were going to come in.
And
let me just say one more thing. The other thing you have to realize is even though Germany is being very receptive, there are a lot of currents in Germany and other European countries that are more on the political right that don't want any of these people in. Okay, and those politics
then they don't participate in the agreement.
Well, but what happens is it's not just in one country; it's in many of those countries. So you have to recognize the international perspective of the country, but also the domestic politics within that country.
Britain is so desperate to prevent Syrian refugees coming in that you've got the Prime Minister going into Jordan Jordan, and into Turkey to say, how can we help you set up more camps here to keep all the people here?
Let's go to Anna Tuson again, who is with us from Istanbul. Is there a solution to this? At least initially, I've heard that as the winter comes, the flow will slow down a bit. But what's the solution?
Yeah, I do think, as was just spoken about, I think that, the international community actually coming to Turkey and, working together with the NGOs on the ground here and the Turkish government, that's necessary in terms of a direct and immediate response. The numbers are here. And as I said, a lot of people aren't trying to leave. They just want to be able to build better lives. And that's basic needs, but that's also, the ability to work legally, which currently they don't have in this country, which is a huge problem, and better access to education for their children.
All right, Anna Tuson from Small Projects Istanbul, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to say goodbye to you. What if, we've been just talking about Europe, but what if the countries, and we have a minute left and I'm sorry, but what if the countries around the world who wouldn't mind having some refugees, immigrants, enhance their economy, all agree, and then fly the planes out? I know I'm harping on this, but it seems like an obvious answer to it.
Well, we need a global system for some kind of agreement.
Well, where's
like
the UN in this? Where's the UN in this?
Sometimes treaties begin through the Security Council, but ultimately they're going to get brokered, or through the General Assembly, but they're going to be brokered among parties around the world. There's got to be some incentive for all these nations to join up.
You think they would come up with one? We're out of time, Professor Davenport.
Sorry.
We're going to leave it there. We're going to take a break. When we return, the race for the White House. But the Democrats at least got a little bit more focus this week. An explanation when we come back.